Hey everyone, Julian here, and welcome to the sew along for my new Know Me pattern, which is ME2059, my fall saddle sleeve coat. Really fun pattern. I was really thinking of a lot of like James Bond, that English countryside, people in their Jaguars and stuff like that, those car coats of the mid-century. But I wanted to make sure it had some really fun details, such as the saddle shoulders and the seaming, the princess lines in the seaming allows for a lot of fun pattern play when you, or even color, when you think of your fabric choices. So when you look at my pattern, I did it all in one color here, just kind of as a way that this is just a classic timeless look. But in our sew along today, I'm going to give you a little bit of an extra option that you can do just by changing your fabric to really give a large impact. So let's get started. So before we get into the nitty gritty of really sewing this coat, I want to show you the fabric that I plan to use. So this is like a tapestry jacquard fabric that I've had in my collection for years. I got it from a local shop here in Cincinnati, Ohio called Silk Rose Textiles. And what I like about it is that it has Indinger symbols in the fabric. So it has that interesting African edge. And I feel like fabrics like these are really great for this coat just because of its simple lines, but there's also room for some fun details. So if we look at our line drawings, especially our back, we can see how that shoulder detailing and the princess seams really allow for some interesting fun. So I want to play with a little contrast as we have here with this fabric is full of like the grayscale of blacks and whites and grays. I think adding this black to it is just going to be a nice contrast. And this is our first hack. So what I plan to do is make my back band, my sleeves, my collar, as well as my pocket welts in this black so that it can contrast with the body of the coat, which will be in this tapestry print. This is also a great coat for a lot of your upcycling projects, especially if you like to upcycle with quilts or with tapestries that you might find at a thrift store or something like that. Really great use that will be a little bit different than what you normally see. So let's get started. So one of the first things that I want to mention about this pattern is that it now comes in an increased size range. So this pattern goes from size 38 chest up to a size 56 chest, where normally patterns usually stop at around a 52. So that's a really exciting thing. But because of that, you might notice that your size has moved envelopes. I'm normally around a 46, and usually I can find that in a size BB. But because of the way the size range runs in this coat, it is in a size AA. So I just want that to be something that you take notice of. So as I will be making view A of this coat, so that is the one with the buttons, these are the pieces that I will need. We start with piece number 1, which is our front. We are going to cut 2 out of our fabric. Next, we would need piece 2, which is our side front. We are going to cut 2 out of fabric as well as 2 out of lining. Next, we need piece 3, which is our welt. We will cut 2 out of fabric as well as 2 out of interfacing. We need piece 4, which is our pocket. We need 2 out of fabric as well as 2 out of lining. Next, we need piece 5, which is our back. We're going to cut 2 out of fabric. Then we need piece 6, which is our tab, which is across the back. We need 1 out of fabric and 1 out of interfacing. Then we need piece 7, which is our side back. We will need 2 out of fabric as well as 2 out of lining. Then we will need piece 8, which is our yoke and sleeve front. We will need 2 out of fabric and 2 out of lining. Then we will need piece 9, which is our yoke and sleeve back. We will need 2 out of fabric and 2 out of lining. And then we will need piece 10, which is a collar for A. We will need 2 out of fabric and 1 out of interfacing. Then we will need piece 11, which is our front facing. We will need 2 out of fabric and 2 out of interfacing. Piece 12 is our front lining. We will cut 2 out of our lining fabric. We then need piece 13, which is our right back lining. We'll cut 1 of these. So if you decide to follow along with me and do a little hack of the pattern, I'm adding a contrasting fabric, especially on our collar, our sleeves, and our welts and our back tab. So to do that, you will need to cut these pattern pieces out of the contrasting fabric instead of the regular main fabric. So those are piece 3, which are our welt. We'll cut those out of the contrasting fabric as well as out of interfacing. Piece number 4, we will cut 2 of these out of the contrasting fabric as well as 2 of these out of the lining fabric. Or in my case, I cut 4 out of the contrasting fabric. You'll need to cut 1 of piece 6, which is the tab, out of your contrasting fabric, as well as 1 out of interfacing. You will cut piece 8, which are your yoke and sleeve fronts, out of your contrasting fabric. You'll cut 2 of those, as well as 2 out of your lining fabric. Finally, you'll cut piece 9, which are your yoke and sleeve back, out of your contrasting fabric twice, as well as you'll cut 2 of your lining as well. So to get us started, what I'm going to do is take both of my front pieces and I'm going to stay stitch the neckline as well as stay stitch the dots for my pocket. So I'm going to stitch an inch above as well as an inch below those dots marked on your pattern for your pocket. What I also did, because of this fabric's weave, I went ahead and provided a little bit of stabilization across those dots. So I will still go ahead and reinforce where those dots are, but I also went ahead and added a piece of stabilizer on the back. That is up to you depending on the type of fabric that you're using. Now we're going to take piece number 3, which is our welt, which is been interfaced. We are going to fold it in half, making sure that our notches are marked, and we are going to sew down each side at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So once I sewed down both sides of my welt, I went ahead and clipped my corners as well as my seam allowance and turned it right side out, giving it a good press. So now that our welt is done, what we're going to do is we are going to take our coat front, and you know where that pocket is by the cutout notch there. And I've also made some little clips where my dots are. That's just my chosen method of marking where I keep dots and notches and stuff on a busier fabric. But we are going to take our welt, placing it on top, matching where my notch is with the rest of the pocket, as well as where my dots are, making sure that this is all lined up together. And we are going to base this in place. So once you have basted your welt in place, I went ahead and just put my pocket piece, one of my pocket pieces, right over top. And I've also marked my dots on here. So I will be sewing my pocket piece on at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance between the dots. And it should line up with actual welt as well. So once that pocket piece is sewn on, what we're going to do is we're going to open it up and give it a nice finger press. And we're going to go ahead and understitch along that edge. So basically we're going to make sure that we are pushing all the seam allowances this way. We're going to do a small line of stitching right on the pocket piece itself, so as that it does not start creeping out when your hand's in your pocket. So we're going to do that between the dots as well. So once I have completed my understitching along my pocket piece, what I went ahead and did was I went ahead and clipped between both sides of the fabric on either side of my welt at those dots. What this allows me to do is be able to have my pocket go there, so I will not be catching my pocket when I go to install my side front. But for now, what we're going to do is just put these up above it. There you go. And we're going to take our other pocket piece, right sides together, making sure to match all my notches. And we're going to go ahead and sew along this edge. Now, if you're scared of catching your front in the piece, you can actually pivot it right at where you make that slash into the fabric, and then you can line everything up and it's out the way so you don't accidentally catch it. So we're going to go ahead and do that, give this a press, and then we'll start working on installing our side front. So now that we have gone ahead and installed our other pocket piece, If you look at it from the front, after giving it a press, you will notice that your pocket is facing toward where your side front will be. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this welt piece, we're going to kind of fold that back and either baste it in place or just give it a pin here, just so it's out the way as we go to attach our side fronts to this seam. So I've gone ahead and sewed on my side front panel to my front panel, and as you can see here, we have our welt and our pocket is going towards the front of the coat. Now, as you're sewing this on, it can get bulky as you're getting around this welt. Sometimes you might find that your seam allowance is not quite 5/8 of an inch, and you might see a little bit of those stitching lines here. If that is the case, what you can do is you can go ahead and do a slip stitch by hand, just making sure that all of your seam allowances line up in these areas. I like to say that you can hide a multitude of seams with a few hand stitches. So feel free to do that if it is not lining up as close as you want to due to the bulk of this. Now, once your fronts are on and I have pressed my seam allowances open, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to top stitch the two edges of my welt pocket onto the side front. And we're going to do that as close to the edge as possible. Now that both of my fronts are done and I've attached my pockets, this is where I kind of diverge from the pattern slightly. So I find that putting the whole body of the coat together and then installing the sleeves, it's a little bit cumbersome, especially under my sewing machine. But because of this type of sleeve that offers that top shoulder seam, what I am going to go ahead and do is attach my shoulder and sleeve front to my front panel of my coat. I'm going to sew it at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I then go back and sew it again 1/8 inch away within the seam allowance of that, just for stability. I then go ahead and clip and give it a press. So on the inside, this is what it looks like. So I'm going to add that to this other side, and then we'll start working on the back of the coat. So installing the sleeve front to my coat, I make sure that I'm lining up all of my notches and my dots at the top. And as you can see, you're going to have to do a little bit of easing, but it's important to take your time and go around the curve. So we're going to sew this at 5/8 of an inch, and then again 1/8 of an inch within that seam allowance. Now that we're going to start working on the back panel, what we're going to start with is by reinforcing this inner corner. Now what I've done, because of this tapestry style fabric, I've put a square of interfacing here just to kind of help make sure that it doesn't warp out of place or anything like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sew an inch above the dot, the large dot here, pivot at there, and go at a diagonal another inch, making sure that this is all taken care of. And then we're going to clip into this corner here to the actual dot. Once we have done that, we are going to place these right sides together and sew from the dot all the way to the top, making sure that our notches all match. We'll then go ahead and press our seam allowance open. So now that we've gone ahead and put together our back panel and pressed our seams open, we're going to start working on our back tab. So we're going to take piece number 6, which is our back tab, which has already been interfaced, and we're going to fold it in half lengthwise and then stitch it along this line 5/8 inch seam allowance. We will then go ahead and turn this out and give it a press, with making sure that this seam is fitting into the middle of the piece. And when I get there, I will show you how that works. So I've gone ahead and did my strap, and once I turned it out, I positioned it so that my back seam is toward the center of the actual tab itself. And to match the top stitching I did along the pockets, I went ahead and did 2 lines of top stitching, one at the bottom and one at the top, at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Now, we're going to base this onto our back panel at the 2 dots. So now what I do to mark my dots is I go ahead and make small notches in my fabric. And we're going to place this right side up along those dots. And I am going to simply do a line of stitching on either end to tack that in place. And then we'll start working on attaching our back side panels. So as you can see, the back panel is all put together, and you can also see that there's already starting to build some curve into it so that it can contour around your body, because there are curves in the shape of the back piece. So now, similarly to the front, what I'm going to go ahead and do is start working on my back shoulder and sleeve part. So to do that, I'm going to take my pieces here, and we are going to put them right sides together, and we're going to sew them 5/8 of an inch at where it is a triple knot. So this will be your center back piece. So we're going to sew that together and then press the seam allowance open. So now that we've gone ahead and stitched that center back seam, what you can go ahead and do is you can go ahead and stay stitch the neckline of the outer coat edge at 5/8 of an inch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start pinning this along this back edge. So we're going to make sure that our centers match as well as our notches. And we are also going to make sure that we're matching all of our notches all the way around as well as our dots. And we're going to sew that along this edge at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then reinforce again an 1/8 of an inch within the seam allowance from there. So now that we have the back sewn up together with our sleeves on, we can really see why this coat really lends itself to do some color blocking or using contrasting fabric, because of this interesting seam detail that is just highlights it. So I love it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to attach our fronts to our back here at our shoulder and the top of our sleeves. We're going to do that at 5/8 seam allowance. Once we have done that, we are going to press that seam open. So as you're pinning your pieces together, if you're using this method at the shoulder seam, you might notice that at first glance, your notches are not going to match on this outer edge. But if you pin at the bottom and at the top, that is going to help make sure that these curves then match, and you can ease in all the rest of this so that they do come to match when you put this together. I'm going to actually start at the bottom of my sleeve and work my way up on both sides to make sure that I am getting the right amount of ease in the right places along that curve. So as you can see, I am taking my time, making sure that I am able to make this curve, still at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And at the moment, my notches do not match up, which is okay, because I rather my neckline and my hem match up, and my curve still does match. So hence why I started pinning at the bottom and at the top, and then distributed all the interior. And the biggest thing that we see here is that while they're about an inch off, everything, the curve matches correctly. So that is what we're going to focus on. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to my iron. I'm going to press these seams open. So now that we've gone ahead and pressed our seam open for the top of our sleeve, we're now going to work on the side. So I pinned my coat shell all the way from the bottom through the sleeve all the way to the top. And I'm going to start sewing from the bottom all the way up, 5/8 inch seam allowance on either side. And then we will press these seams open as well. So you might notice that this is the way that you put most of, like a lot of your men's shirts and stuff together. And that's just how my mind works. If you like it where you are putting the sleeve together first and then putting it into the coat, the pattern instructions does go through those steps for you in that order. So now that we have gone ahead and sewn up the body of the coat and pressed our seam allowances open, we will now attach our collar. So we take our interface collar piece and we attach it kind of the large edge of the collar to the coat body itself, right sides together. And this is, I'm using my interfaced piece. I go first and I match my centers. I made a small notch there so I know where my center is of my collar. And then my small dots match to my shoulder seams. And I match my notches as well. And then we just sew it all the way around, 5/8 inch seam allowance. And as needed, you go ahead and clip this curve after sewing it, and you want to press your seam allowance open. Then we'll start working on the lining. To get started with our lining, there is some prep work that needs to happen. The first thing we need to do is we need to shorten our lining pieces on the side back, the side front, and both sleeve pieces. What we're going to do is we are cutting off 1 inch off the bottom edge. This will allow us to make sure everything lies properly when we do the bag lining. So go ahead and trim off your inch off of each of these pieces. So on the front facing pieces that are already interfaced, what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and stay stitch the top neckline on both sides, as well as we are going to reinforce the dot, which is at the bottom right here. I marked it with a notch here, so we're going to sew 1 inch above, 1 inch below at 5/8 inch seam allowance, and this will come in handy when we start to put our lining together. So I've gone ahead and finished up all my lining pieces, as well as attached my collar facing. What we are now going to do is we are going to put the two pieces together, the lining as well as the outer shell, right sides together. We are then going to stitch down, starting from the bottom, all the way around that interfacing, up, pivot at the collar, all the way around, and back down to the other facing side. After that, what we will then do is we will go ahead and we will understitch our collar piece towards the lining itself. And I'll show you that when we get there. Then we will pin together, and what we're going to do is sew from where this dot is. I'm going to mark a pin here and sew all the way up to the top. So I will meet you at the sewing machine when we do that. So once you have gone on and sewn up your back seam of your lining, starting at your bottom dot and working your way up, what we are now going to do, once pressed, is we are going to go ahead and stitch in the pleat, which is marked on your pattern for about 2 inches or so. So we're going to then stitch that, and then what we will do is press our back piece open from that pleat. So your seam allowance itself will not be pressed open. Once you have done that, what you are then going to do is put together your lining similarly to how you put together your coat body. So you're going to put your side backs on, you're going to put your facing, then your front lining piece, then your side fronts. Then you can go ahead and do your shoulders for your sleeves on your back and your front, and then sew it all together. Once you have done that, we'll come back together as we put on our collar for the lining. So now that we've gone ahead and sewn our lining to our outer fabric, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my corners are clipped on all edges, and I am going to go through the bottom of the coat to the collar, and I'm going to understitch along this edge just to make sure that all of my seam allowances are faced towards my lining piece so that my collar will roll back towards the lining and not get stretched out of shape. Also here they tell you to go ahead and attach the two pieces, like the inner collar and the outer collar together. I'm going to wait and stitch in the ditch once we turn the coat out. So we're going to do this understitch, and then we will take it back over to the main table, and I'll show you how we will attach our lining at our bottom edge. And as we are getting here, as you can see, it's getting real tight under my needle. You do not have to go all the way to the edge with your understitching. You want to get as close as you can just to make sure that most of the collar does not flip towards the outside. So I think we're going to stop here. So as you can see, on the interface side, I went ahead and understitched to about upwards of 1 to 2 inches on either side of my upper neck edge, or the upper part of my collar. What the pattern also calls for you to do is to understitch as far as you can down the front edge of your coat. So you want to take that back to your machine and also understitch that. So now we're going to focus on fixing the lining around our vent. So with our coat still right sides together, as you can see by both of my seams facing outward, we're going to start on the right side, matching our right back piece to our left back piece at the dots. We're going to match our dots, and we're going to start up here and work our way down and stopping within 2 inches of the bottom, which I've marked with a pin. And we're going to make sure that we're not catching our other side of our lining to that. So on the left side, what we're going to do, moving that out the way, is we're going to do something similar, where we are taking our coat piece, matching up our dots again, and working our way down, stopping within 2 inches of our seam line so that this can then turn back. So now that the lining has been attached to the vents of the jacket, what we are now going to start doing is working on the hem of the coat. So now note, the lining is 1 inch shorter. So what you're going to start doing is pulling down this lining to match the hem. Okay. And we're going to start matching our seams on all of the fronts. Now we are then going to sew this across at 1/2 inch seam allowance, knowing that there's going to be a space here at the edge for turning in. But we're going to sew this around, and we're going to make sure that at one of these places, so now that we have gone ahead and sewn our lining edge to the bottom of our coat shell, Remember, we left this 2-inch space between the lining and the shell at the back vent. What we are now going to do is we are going to fold the outer shell up and over just to complete that fold. So that 2 inches that we have here, whatever wrinkle is right there, this will like naturally fold this edge up on either side. What you're now going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish this edge all the way down on this side. And I'm going to finish this edge and come across on this side. So now that you have the coat fully turned out, what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that your what will be the right side of your vent is laying under your left. And along this top edge here, you can go ahead and pin that so that you can either slip stitch it or top stitch it. Just the length of that vent to hold it together. Once you have done that, we're going to start working on the sleeves. So to prepare the process of hemming your sleeve, you want to make sure that you put your lining into your sleeve. So once you have bagged it out, you want to make sure that you are threading your lining sleeve into your outer shelf sleeve. Once you have done that, this is where the origami comes in a little bit. What you are then going to do is you're going to take your sleeves, and I like to match them up with my seam allowances. And I turn my seam allowances in so that they are matching, and I pin them in place. What I then am going to do is I'm going to find my hole in the lining. We're going to pin or pull that sleeve through there. Okay. Now, as you will notice, these two, I found my pin and they're still pinned in place. What I can then do is go through and match up all of my lining right sides together all along so that we can go and hem our sleeves. And we're going to be using our regular seam allowance of 5/8 of an inch. So once you've gone ahead and sewn your sleeve lining to your sleeve, it looks like there's like a huge tube and you're going to be a little worried. Luckily, doing it this way where you put them together from inside the coat is going to make it work out. So you're going to pull it back out through the hole in the sleeve. There you go. And what you'll notice is that everything is lined here. So now once you have gone ahead and done that, you want to turn your sleeve, make sure that it's on the right side. You'll want to give this a press, and you're going to be pressing up the sleeve hem. So that, as you can see, is that about an inch difference is going to be that sleeve hem. And then you're going to allow your sleeve lining to drop. And that's if you prefer to hand slip through the opening in the lower edges of the coat. You want to tack in the shoulder and the arm side of the jacket. So you want to make a few tacking stitches just to hold all of your linings together throughout the jacket. So usually you'll do 1, 2 up here, and then 1 down here in the armhole, just to make sure that you are holding your lining in place. What you're then going to do to finish up your sleeve lining is you are going to top stitch this at 7/8 inch seam allowance. So now we're on to the final finishing of the coat. What you're going to do is you're going to make sure that you are slip stitching in your lining and give your time lining to drop. As we know that this coat has some different weights of fabric and different things like that. So you want to make sure that you're giving time for your lining to get acclimated to the coat, just in case you need to even up anything. What you are then going to do is you're going to pin this lining out the way, and you're going to top stitch on the outside of the coat at 7/8 in seam allowance after you make sure that you slip stitch this, as well as this little space at the edge of your front. You want to make sure you slip stitch that. Now with me, I like to leave a little extra room if I have to go in and kind of pull out my collar. So I'm going to slip stitch this all together and then add on my buttons, meaning I will add on my buttons and buttonholes to the front of the coat, all the way from the collar down, but then also adding my buttons to my tab if you so desire. After that, you have completed Know Me 2059. I don't know about you, but I think I'm ready for fall coat season. What do you think?